Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm Kate Seeley, Vice President of Programs and Communications here at MEI. Thank you all for joining us today. We've had a wonderful response to today's event. So wonderful, we had to shut down registration about 2 days after we opened it. So when you get our event mailers, jump on them. They're the hot item in town these days. And for those of you in the overflow room, thank you for your tolerance. And we have question cards, and should you have questions afterwards, there are interns who will bring your question cards to the front so you're not forgotten. We've been having a really fun time with our Lebanon policy series. This spring, last month, we hosted Mona Yakubian of USIP and Andrew Tabler of WINIP for a talk about Lebanese-Syrian relations. And next month, we've got Paul Salem of the Carnegie Beirut Center talking about the situation in Lebanon. He'll be speaking on June 9th, so please mark that down. It's a real pleasure and a treat to have with us today Nick Blanford, who is an old friend and a longtime resident of Beirut, to be talking about sort of the hot topic of the moment. Will there be another war between Israel and Hezbollah? Obviously, there's been a lot of speculation about this ever since the last war in 2006 because there was no definitive victor. And speculation has been heightened ever since the Israelis mentioned in April allegations that the Syrians are shipping Scud missiles. Scud Bs, is it? Maybe. We don't know. But long-range and relatively accurate Scud missiles from Syria into Lebanon. The U.S. State Department has not confirmed these allegations, but they've said that if they are true, they are very, very concerned. Assistant Secretary of State Jeffrey Feltman had a meeting with the House Foreign Affairs Committee sometime in April and I gather was a rather testy meeting. And he said that if the allegations are in fact true, then all options are on the table. The Syrians have denied the allegations. We don't know if the reports are true. Maybe Nick has some information. We'll find out. But if not, he's certainly in a very good position to talk about Hezbollah's arms buildup since 2006 and the regional implications if there is, in fact, another Hezbollah-Israel war. I don't know many other people who have followed Hezbollah's development and the growth of its military prowess as closely as Nick has. He's been reporting on the organization since he moved to Lebanon in 1994, where he was a reporter initially for the Daily Star in Lebanon and covered Israel's occupation of South Lebanon and then its withdrawal. And I have to say, this is a man who knows the back roads of South Lebanon inside and out. He knows the valleys and the mountains, maybe not as well as Hezbollah, but he knows them. He knows them very, very well. And he's got very, very good contacts with the UNIFIL. Such good contacts, in fact, that when he got married, they sent a brigade of bagpipe players to his wedding. So he now writes for the Christian Science Monitor and the Times of London, and he's a frequent contributor to Jane's Defense Weekly and Jane's Intelligence Review. Nick published his first book in 2006. Many of you here know it, Killing Mr. Lebanon, The Assassination of Rafiq Hariri and Its Impact on the Middle East. That came out through IB Tauris. And his second book, Warriors of God, Hezbollah, Israel, and the Struggle for the Middle East, is coming out in 2011, next year. And that is being published by Random House, which is pretty amazing. So I look forward to that. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Nick Blanford.
Thank you, Kate. Well, it's great to be back at the Middle East Institute after a long gap of almost 10 years. Back in December 2000, I gave a small talk here on what was then my first visit to Washington. At the time, Hezbollah had just launched its military operations against Israeli troops occupying the Sheba farms. I forget the exact title of the talk, but it essentially discussed the prospect of war breaking out between Hezbollah and Israel. So nothing much really seems to have changed there. Because of the limited time for the talk and not move into question time, I'm going to devote my comments just to Hezbollah's war preparations rather than include some of the military developments on the other side of the border in Israel. And to start with, I'm going to look at some of the lessons Hezbollah learned from the last war in 2006. In the wake of that war, Hezbollah undertook a comprehensive review of its combat performance, examining areas in which their tactics and weaponry were successful, and listing areas where improvements must be made. So dealing with the areas of success first. The camouflaged rocket-firing positions and bunker networks in the Deep South proved their worth during the war. After the Israeli withdrawal from South Lebanon in 2000, which incidentally began today, 10 years ago, Hezbollah deployed into remote rural areas, valleys and hilltops in Lebanon's southern border district and sealed them off to everyone, including local residents and UNIFIL peacekeepers. Inside these security pockets, what the Israelis called nature reserves, Hezbollah steadily built up a formidable military infrastructure of underground bunker systems, tunnels, weapons depots, rocket-firing positions, and observation posts. While we suspected that Hezbollah was probably doing some digging in their security pockets, the scale of what they had built in the south was underestimated by everyone, and it gave Hezbollah advantages of surprise in the early stages of the war. And this was also true in its use of the C-802 shore-to-ship cruise missile, a weapon that no one had any idea was in Hezbollah's hands, which came close to sinking an Israeli missile boat in the opening days of the war. The anti-tank tactics, by and large, met with some success, despite Israel fielding one of the most heavily armored fleets of tanks in the world. Anti-tank missiles were Hezbollah's deadliest weapon during the conflict, accounting for at least 50 of the IDF's 119 fatalities. Hezbollah was also pleased with the performance of the village guard units. These are part-time combatants, almost all of whom are veterans of Hezbollah's resistance campaign in the 1980s and 1990s. They were the ones responsible for defending some of the villages along the border, and perhaps the best example of that was Aitishab, the nearest village to the scene of the abduction of the two soldiers which triggered the conflict in the first place. The Israelis were unable to capture that village in 34 days of fighting. I met a pair of village guard fighters midway through the war in another village called Srifa. Both of them were teachers, but they were also combat veterans from the early 1980s. Their confidence and sense of calm was impressive, even as the Israelis were staging airstrikes against a neighboring village at the time. They knew the local terrain intimately, they understood their mission, were highly disciplined, and were absolutely confident of victory. Hezbollah's communication system was another plus, from the low-tech walkie-talkies, which they used to communicate using ad hoc verbal codes, to the more advanced fiber optic networks linking key bases, fighting positions, and command posts. Wireless communications were jammed by the Israelis along the front lines, but Hezbollah appears to have largely overcome this, partly through reliance on the copper and fiber optic landline network, and also through intensive pre-planning, so that units that were cut off from the chain of command could still act according to their battle orders, while also being given the autonomy to adapt those orders if the situation on the ground so required.